think they will introduce themselves, but just quickly, this is Gavin. Everybody say hi, Gavin. Hi, Gavin. Good job. This is Andy. Everybody, you know. Hi, Andy. And this is Orshi. Yes, good. Good job. Okay, I'm going to hand it over, and a big round of applause, please. Let the show begin.
So should we just introduce ourselves?
Yeah, sure.
So yeah, I'm Gavin. I've been in tech for quite a long time. Before then, I was a drummer and then a theology student, but that's my past. I'm still a drummer. But yeah, I was one of the founders of a thing called Mixit. I don't know if you guys remember that, way back when, this instant messenger thing. And then, yeah, to cut a long story short, I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and I mean, when Bitcoin had come out, I pretty much wrote it off as a bad idea. I didn't think it would ever work, and I'm kind of embarrassed about that. But was at a conference in San Francisco, yeah, about 3-4 years ago, and this one speaker, a really powerful guy from MIT, was speaking about all sorts of crazy tech that I'd never heard of before. And then he made the statement that Bitcoin is probably the most profound innovation since the internet. And I sat up and thought, okay, I missed that. And proceeded then afterwards to just go and study as much as I could about it. At the same time, I was doing a lot of studies around what is money, how do we solve the problem of money, got into like Charles Eisenstein and sacred economics and all sorts of things, and Bitcoin seemed to just be a nice common denominator. And as I got deeper into it, I started realizing, holy crap, this is intense, this is profound. You know, what it does is it takes the power of money away from the institutions and it sets it free again for us to allow, you know, value to flow. And so yeah, and 2.5 years ago, I quit my job and started doing this full time and try to set up a startup, allowing people to issue shares on the blockchain and all sorts of things. But eventually now, most of my time is spent sort of lecturing, teaching, consulting, telling banks that we don't need them anymore, doing all sorts of things, and then also a couple of really interesting projects that I'm working on. So that's me.
Okay, I'm Andy. Good. Okay. So I have a somewhat academic perspective. If I cast my mind back to when my interest, I guess, related to this began, it was I was on a fellowship in Japan doing work on understanding information storage technology. But crucially here, I read an article in a Japanese paper written in English by the then chairman of Sony, who described the internet as being akin to the meteor that struck the Yucatan Peninsula and subsequently saw the emergence of small, fast, agile and intelligent mammals, in the ascendance and the extinction of the dinosaurs. And I'll leave that there for a moment before then continuing to do my research, doing a startup with a colleague, which required negotiations with venture capitalists. And during the negotiation, it became apparent this ain't right. These guys are taking advantage of the fact we don't have liquidity, we have no cash flow. They're using that to get a better share in the equity. Come on, this can't be right. How can we form a community of startups where we distribute the risk among ourselves instead of the venture capitalists managing a portfolio and placing all the risk on us individually? How might we transact? How might we share skills across communities of startups in a way that keeps value with the originators? So continuing on then, after exiting that company, I went to study at the Royal. Up closer. Okay. I went back into study after the startup. I exited the company and went to study at the Royal College of Art, where I wrote a part of my work was to write a thesis that I called a vehicle for hunting dinosaurs wearing fur coats. And it was this idea: how can we actually enable little startups to effectively compete with big corporations? And at that point, kind of thought there's some need of a token or something that would facilitate transactions. So started to experiment with that, but recognized that to validate the idea, we needed a social system to play with, if you like, to introduce the ideas to, experiment in a safe way that wouldn't cause too much anguish if the system failed. So that then brought me back to, when I finished in London at the RCA, I went back to my home in North Wales to raise a family, and was fortunate, timing-wise, to have been able to propose a new innovation centre. And that then afforded me the chance to look at social systems and multidisciplinary approaches to innovation, which is really my main interest now, and that is, how can you understand and seek to solve complex problems, sometimes called wicked problems. Typically you need to have multidisciplinary perspectives, but how you combine them effectively, quickly, to bring change is really my fundamental sort of interest and question from an academic perspective. And then I met Tim. And that's a whole other story.
Hi. Hi, everyone. My name is Orshi. And I'm not the tech-savvy person here, so if you want to know about this, then these are the guys to ask. I have a background in international relations, and I was very interested later on how to design a better world for the people. So I started to study policy design and human development at the university that it belongs to a very criticized organization, the United Nations, which exposed me to the development paradigm that we have been resorting to the last decades. And I had to come to terms with the truth or my opinions that I had to confirm them that I was right, that sadly enough we don't have a new perception about how we could approach complex issues that are happening in the developing world, such as Africa, for instance. So I quit, I graduated from university, but I was quite disappointed and I wasn't sure what I should do. So I came to actually South Africa and I started working on financial inclusion, focusing on rural communities. And I was working predominantly with women, elderly women. And they are part of the unbanked sector. And oftentimes they also have issues with their identification. They have issues with land rights. And I realized that one of the technologies that could be very efficient for them is blockchain. So this is actually how I came across blockchain. I did a little research and I thought that could be a fundamental game changer for them, but also in other sectors within the development sector around the world. So yeah, that's about me.
I think maybe we should just throw it out and let's see what people want to know. Or, we can do a talk. But let's rather start off with maybe some questions, and then we can take it from there. Kind of keep it more organic. You guys happy with that?
Absolutely.
So anyone who would want to ask something about this, yeah, good. I was hoping that we have a question to start off.
I would like to hear from all of you. What do you think the possible impact of the blockchain will have on the world? Like, what impact are you most excited about? What impact are you most excited about?
Sure. So can I start, or do you want to start, please?
Well, again, from a humanitarian perspective, I have an answer to that. So there are two main issues that are very high on the Sustainable Development Agenda that is, again, drafted by the UN. You can dispute it. But anyways, one is the identification of people. So there are currently more than 1.1 billion people worldwide who don't have an ID, which is roughly 1 in every 7 person. And this is an issue, especially when we are talking about refugees. And right now, refugees and displaced people. So today there are 60 million refugees worldwide. And if you don't have an ID, then you cannot go to a different country and claim refuge. So Microsoft is currently developing like a verification method on a blockchain that is running with the UNHCR's own verification process, which is, in my opinion, amazing. because this way, I mean, you're going to empower all of these people, and they will have access to also social services, because that's the other issue. If you don't have an ID, then you don't exist. The other issue that is going to be solved, hopefully, through that is the land rights question. So in Africa, for instance, 90% of the rural land is undocumented. So it doesn't, on paper, belong to anybody. But there are indigenous tribes and communities who live there. So you can imagine if there is a business or foreign entity who want to come to the country, they can just buy this land from the government, which impacts mostly, of course, women and children, because oftentimes the men would leave these communities and move to the cities and urban areas. So, and also globally, it's 70% of the whole global population who don't have any kind of land right, or cannot prove that a certain property belongs to them. And there is also a project that is running on blockchain today by Bitfurry, I think. I don't know if you heard about them. In Georgia, not in the States, but the country itself. And the government is collaborating with them to digitize all of these rights. And they are also going to implement it within different government departments. So I see there is a shift in paradigm in the way that we see blockchain amongst governments.
Cool. So yeah, I think as human beings, we invented numbers, and the reason we invented numbers is because we trade a lot. The reason we trade is so that I can specialize and I can get somebody else to do things that I don't have time for, and it's the invention of money and numbers was a great technology, and we've been trading for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I mean, even the Rosetta Stone was a ledger of the trades for the day. Now, as we've become sort of more complex in the way that we manage, these trades with each other, we've got more and more institutions involved that have basically looked after the money for us. So we would, instead of trading gold, we'd take the gold to the bank or the gold person, and they would then issue us with a certificate, and we'd then trade the certificate, and then every now and again you could then cash it in for gold. Eventually we started digitizing our numbers, so digital money then became a thing. Now, the weird thing is that if I've got like a 20 Rand note in my pocket or a 50 Rand note, I could buy that pen from you straight away. I don't know you. I mean, I'm sure you're wonderful, but I don't have to know you, because the money itself is then this thing that we can trade amongst each other, or find something else to trade. We've been doing this for a long time. The thing is, if I don't have any money, you can't accept my credit card. As a human being, not even the head of the Reserve Bank can accept your credit card as a human being. And as we've moved into digital, instead of me being able to trade with you directly, I need to go through an institution who goes to another institution, and eventually, maybe if they like you, you will get your money. But if you're doing something that they don't approve of, well, you're not going to get your money. And so as we've started digitizing these numbers and becoming more and more dependent on these institutions, we become more and more reliant on them, and they're the ones who then get to create the money. I mean, the money is created by allowing you to borrow money, and as more debt is created, more money is created, and so on. And because of that, we need to create more things to consume so we can pay back the debt, and so on and so forth, and it starts getting out of hand. But we kind of, as we're moving away from cash, we become more reliant on the institutions. Now, what something like Bitcoin has done at the sort of most fundamental level is it's allowed us to be able to trade with each other once again without needing to go through an institution, by creating this sort of algorithmic trust that you have probably the most secure database or ledger in the world without having anybody in control of it. So I could once again buy something from you and trade with you directly without needing to go through an institution. I can send money anywhere in the world to whichever cause I choose. Much more efficient and faster than you can actually going through the institutions. And so not only that, the rules that are baked into the system in terms of how new numbers get issued, new money gets issued, and so on and so forth, can't be changed. There's a set amount of money that gets created every 10 minutes, as opposed to it going into debt the whole time and no one really knowing what the money flow is and not being in control of that. If one had to think of like where the internet was in say 1997, where you couldn't even like download porn properly and stuff like that, whereas now we can stream videos and I think that Bitcoin and blockchain is around there, and so the tech is a bit clunky and so on, but I think we're at the beginning of something incredibly massive and incredibly revolutionary in terms of how we just interact with human beings again, in terms of being able to trade. Not only that, doing some of these things like registering ownership and so on, especially digital ownership. The problem with digital is that it's infinitely duplicatable. So, whether 20 Rand or 50 Rand, I can't go to a photostat machine and make like copies because you're going to see. Whereas if I send you a cat photo, I've still got that cat photo on my computer. So digital currency was a problem, but Bitcoin has solved this. It's like the next thing in the internet. Most of the business models on the internet at the moment are, advertise the crap out of it and give it away for free, because doing money on the internet is very difficult. Plus, 4.5 billion people in the world don't have access to digital currency because of no IDs and so on. Whereas cryptocurrencies do away with that, in that you don't need an identity. You don't need to. You have a private key and a wallet and a public key, so the amount of problems that it solves, and as I said, I think we're only really just seeing the beginning of it. You've got a bunch of geeks that are excited about it, and now a bunch of like business people are excited about it, but it's really just about to explode into the rest of the world, and I think that's a big thing. Yeah, sorry, I spoke quite a lot. You have something to say?
No, ditto. No, going back to the negotiation with funders, with venture capitalists, I think fundamentally my starting point was lowered transaction costs. In order to form a team, in order to bring about change, you need to bring together different resources. In order to do that in a safe way, you need to form contracts and you need to make a transaction. I think so. The smart contracts, the blockchain, will enable. We'll probably see the emergence of a set of kind of trusted archetypes of transactions that apply in different scenarios. I think it will enable people to come together rapidly, far more rapidly and cheaply, to combine their talents and skills to innovate socially, technologically, and so on. And so while it's a kind of, you don't need to trust people, I think it will enable actually trust to form in a social sense, because by enabling in a cheap way for teams of people to come together using an archetypal kind of contract, let's say, well, that's the starting point, but then they'll start to collaborate and then genuine trust will form. And I'm by no means an expert on the technological side of this, but just thinking about that quote from the chairman of Sony regarding the internet, completely disrupting corporate structures, which after all are about coordination of resources. The internet perhaps has started along that route, but the utopian visions that people had for it have not really been realized. I would speculate, I hope, that the blockchain, I think there's a potential, once it's almost a hidden layer, like TCP/IP isn't necessarily, people aren't conscious of it, on the protocols that underpinning the internet's function. I think the blockchain will become invisible. I think trust and transactions and identity will just completely transform business and society. Mm-hmm. It has the potential to, but it also has the potential to be used in rather nefarious ways as well, so it has to be done with caution.
Just to add to that, I think it's also important that people will stop becoming products, because this is what we are today on social media. So through the blockchain, you will be able to pick and select which kind of information you want to share with the rest of the world. I just read it recently, actually, in the papers that a company was getting information about activists who were part of the Black Lives Matter movement in the States, and they were feeding it back to the police. So to me, blockchain is also about democracy.
So I think one of the things I think I'm cautious about is that blockchain has become this magical thing that's going to fix the world, and it's actually only a really small part of the tech stack that it makes this thing work. And the thing that makes me kind of last year especially, a lot of the banks were getting all excited about blockchain and how they could use blockchain to increase their, so I think I would actually take a step back and try and, for me, the basic use cases around trust and around moving value, a lot of the other stuff I think will come, and there are other ways of then decentralizing data and so on, instead of just putting it on the blockchain. So I think there's a lot of evolution that's going to happen in the space. I think sometimes a lot of the hype around it is way ahead of where the tech is actually at, and in order to do that, you then need to make some compromises, which is usually around security and decentralization. I mean, certainly what the banks were then doing was just getting rid of the decentralized side of it. They're like, why should we decentralize this thing when it's the blockchain? But actually, the real heart of this is the fact that we no longer need institutions to do this. And I think, I mean, even something as simple as what we're rolling out this year with Lightning Network on top of Bitcoin will allow for sort of micro payments, small amounts of money to go to you because I like your blog and I can send it to you, or I can, I think what this technology is empowering, which is what you're saying, is moving away from these big giants that monopolize the whole stack. Whereas, as you're saying, I'm not Facebook's customer, I'm their product. Whereas we can start, what blockchain has done is given us a glimpse of what decentralized technology can do. The problem with decentralized technology was then how do you make a living out of it? And that's always been tricky. And so then how do you make a living? Well, you start a company, and the company then, Uber was wonderful, ride sharing economy. And what happened to Uber? Well, it became a big monopoly that's now experimenting with self-driving cars. And the drivers that are, but imagine a world where all of the drivers in Uber were actually shareholders of this cooperative that was, the assets were registered on the blockchain and people got paid. I mean, what does Uber do? They manage the app and then they manage payment. Whereas
that could essentially become distributed.
Yes.
Just like every centralized system, like
exactly.
Media, everything could eventually become distributed.
Exactly. I think blockchain is one of many decentralized, so, we saw that in the music industry. P2P file sharing took out the music industry as we know it. I was at a conference a couple of years ago where they're talking about the war on piracy, and somebody stood up and said, 95% of all music is pirated. What do we do? I'm like, what war? It's over. And the music industry didn't see that coming because the copyright models and so on were from when we invented the phonograph, it never really caught up with that. And I think what blockchain is going to do is, the one industry that's been immune to the internet really has been the financial sector. And, you've had the print media, the music industry, all that kind of stuff affected by that. But now we've actually got this decentralized money and decentralized trust and decentralized ownership and all sorts of things that we can start doing without needing institutions to manage the trust. And I think that's massive. So, yeah.
Do you see blockchain ever substituting banks?
So, I think, it's not good to loan money on the blockchain. You can't really. If I lend you 5 Bitcoin and then you now got to pay that back, and 5 weeks time you got to pay me back 20 times what it's worth.
Most of the digital assets, depending on the fluctuations and the volatility, most of it tends to appreciate in value over long periods of time.
That's what I'm saying. So if I'm lending you Bitcoin and expect you to pay it back to me, there's a problem there. You never will. I'm just using that as an example.
There's a need for interest because it's an appreciating asset.
Correct. So I think banks are useful in terms of loaning for buying property and things like that. But the other thing that I'm finding in the blockchain space is a whole lot of generosity that I've never experienced before anywhere. There's this whole concept of crowdfunding and of doing all sorts of creating things in a whole new way. I was asked at a conference recently, what do I think is the sort of foremost industry heading up what blockchain is doing? And I said, I don't know. There is none at the moment because we haven't invented those industries yet. It's like Facebook and Twitter, we didn't think about them before the internet. You know, now with blockchain, suddenly we're going to have a whole lot of new opportunities to do things in different ways. You know, so for sure, I think banks would definitely need to transform. I think maybe they will still, you know, and I mean, look, it's not going to go away in the next 10 years. You know, these are big institutions with thousands of years of history. But I think for the first time, there's a chance that they're going to be seriously disrupted. And, you know, and we've got to, yeah, for sure. But at the same time, there's also a whole lot of people, opportunists on the space as well, you know, and I think, you know, with the good comes the other side too. So you know, I think we're in for some interesting times, but I think the banks have got a challenge ahead of them, you know. Yeah, I think retail banking, for instance, is going to be massively disrupted by blockchain. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Actually,
yes.
But invite questions. Yeah.
Do you think that the generosity on Bitcoin is sort of an easy come, easy go thing, or do you think it's endemic to the system?
That's hard to say. You know.
I think the philosophy of those who originated it
yes.
reflects on openness.
Yes.
The open source community, you know, contribute freely their time to the generation of technology that has transformed our lives. Most of the backbone of the internet was developed by open source developers, or at least the servers, and so Apache, for example, WordPress. I know a few examples, not so many, but it seems that their philosophy of contribution and sharing engenders a certain generosity.
I mean, Tim and I had this conversation yesterday. I mean, if you think about where money usually comes from, you know, I mean, my father-in-law once said to me that getting wealthy never happens in one generation, you know, and so lots and lots of money usually comes from families that are used to having lots and lots of money, and the money is usually tied up in that, and it's kind of, you're used to this, you know, and you feel like you have a right to have so many servants and this Lamborghini and all sorts of things. Whereas I think what's happened is a lot of people have got really wealthy really quickly that aren't necessarily from that school, and like, geez, what do I do with all this money? You know, and so I think that's part of it. You know, the other thing that I've found, though, is that as you receive generosity and as you start giving and as money flows, you know, you start realizing that, yes, the nature of this technology, namely money, needs to be scarce because, you know, we're taking time, which is scarce, and we sort of freezing it into this set of numbers. But the movement of money doesn't need to be scarce. And until now, you've had this sort of dam where all the water goes, and then the rest of us get this trickle. And I think what blockchain is starting to do is break the dam, and it's flowing. And perceptions are changing, you know. I mean, I would like to think that it's actually endemic to the system based on the sort of anarchic beginnings and so on. You know, I like to think of Bitcoin actually as a sort of alchemic system where it takes the base nature of humans, basically greed, and, you know, I mean, that's what drives the security of the system. I mean, miners are in it for the money. And yet out of it comes this beautiful system of trust and flow and so on that, you know, comes out the other side. Yes.
Do you also think that, like, Bitcoin is kind of like the flag carrier of the technology, the introduction of the concept? And do you think that Bitcoin is not just exposing the idea and new, kind of like a MySpace, and newer technologies are actually going to take over and supersede it?
So, personally, I don't think so. You know, simply because I think some of the top minds in the world in this space are working on the Bitcoin project. And what's been cool is all the altcoins, in that, you know, some of the altcoins will say, but 10-minute confirmation time is way too long, you know, or proof of work sucks, we need to do proof of stake or whatever. And all these guys are experimenting, and we're learning, you know, but the smartest guys in the room are still working on the Bitcoin project, you know, you know, with this kind of technology, I mean, Bitcoin is a very, very complex sort of animal, and you know, with this kind of security that Bitcoin gives comes a lot of trade-offs, you know, and so in order to make it faster, in order to make it blah, you know, you're always trading off against security. And this is the one thing that the sort of core developers of the Bitcoin project have not sacrificed on at all. Until recently, we've figured out how to actually make Bitcoin scale without sacrificing security. And with Lightning Network coming out within this next year, I think suddenly we're going to really scale Bitcoin to thousands of transactions a second with very low transaction fee. You know, we'll have a layer of privacy that isn't necessarily in Bitcoin, and so on and so forth. So a lot of the stuff that the altcoins are trying to do, Bitcoin will then solve. You know, so my kind of gut feel, and I mean, hell, I could be wrong. I mean, I really don't know. You could get something that just takes it out. But right now, I think that Bitcoin has probably got the best chance of all to actually to succeed in the space. I think Ethereum comes definitely a second, although Ethereum is a completely different animal to Bitcoin. You know, it seeks to be like a world computer for smart contracts and so on. I think Ethereum's got a way to go in terms of maturity, and really just proving that it is as secure as we think it is. You know, so I would put my money on those two right now. I mean, not investing. I'm not an investment advisor. That's what I'm kind of bullish about in terms of tech. You know.
So I don't have quite the knowledge about the technology, but I think I'm not invested in any Bitcoin or Ethereum or anything. I'm looking at it from a very much an academic perspective. I thought about putting £100 in just to see, but I'm not invested at all, so I don't mind which one wins. But it seems to me likely that at some point in the future something will emerge to compete directly with Bitcoin, and I can't imagine, just because they're the best minds in the world, that they don't get bound to a certain structure or philosophy or approach that they then become invested in. My understanding from reading a bit about the guys who are leading the Bitcoin is that politically it hasn't been straightforward, that there have been a whole bunch of problems with regard to their own decision making. I mean, could you comment on that? I mean,
the thing is, it's not a company.
No, but
you know, and so you don't have a CEO saying this is what we're going to do.
But you have a number of people who are able to do commits. Is that correct?
Yes, but then you need the miners and the nodes to all accept those commits. There's no one that actually controls the Bitcoin network.
That's the one thing that I've noticed that I think is holding Bitcoin back, is that there's no governance system built into Bitcoin, so they can't come to consensus on any major changes that actually requires long periods of time to lapse before the community can decide on.
I think it's a feature. I think it's a feature.
You know,
no, I think that's a feature. That it can't be coerced in any way. You know, changing this beast is actually bloody hard. You know, I mean, even trying to get Bitcoin to do something like scaling, Bitcoin resists because it's designed to resist change in terms of its core rules that are set out. In order for those rules to change, you know, you need a massive consensus to make that happen. You know, I actually think that's a feature of Bitcoin.
Let's say, for instance, in a situation where Bitcoin's consuming ridiculous amounts of power, and you have a project which achieves the same kind of role with not consuming the same amount of power, where Bitcoin could compete if it was able to change, but
there's nothing stopping us from putting a different algorithm in if that happens, you know.
Yeah, but you would need to get consensus.
Yes, but I mean, if there was a need for consensus and a desperate need, it would possibly happen. For instance, if we found a bug in SHA-256, for instance, you know, if it was compromised, believe me, that would change really quickly, because there would be a real need that everybody was affected by. Whereas how to scale Bitcoin as do we have bigger blocks or not, you know, it wasn't as urgent a thing. It wasn't as if the system was breaking. You know, in terms of energy consumption, you know, I mean, proof of stake is interesting, you know, but it hasn't been proved in the wild yet. We don't know. There isn't anything yet that has provably been as secure. Yes, and we'll see. You know, but I would like to see it tested. You know, we can only know for sure that it works once it's been there for, like, you know, and hackers are using it and no one can break it and so on. Give it like 5 years in the wild, and then yes, I'll say great, proof of stake works. Right now we know proof of work works. You know, a lot of the media around the energy consumption though is you know, misplaced. You know, and I don't see that as being a big problem. You know, I think one of the things that we're doing in the world is we you know, energy is not a problem. We have all the energy we need from the sun. You know, plants have been harvesting energy for millions of years. We just haven't figured that out yet. You know, and so I think energy is going to be something that becomes less and less costly. But what we have with Bitcoin is we have this thermodynamic security in that you're taking energy and converting it into money, converting it into value.
Like creating the creation of fiat currency,
yes.
printing coins and printing paper and processing the ore. That's all very energy intensive.
But beyond that, I mean, the creation, sorry to interrupt you, the creation of fiat currency is debt. You know, fiat is a debt-based currency. You know, banks have like 10%, 15% reserve. They then lend money into being by giving you a loan. And they only need 15% of the money in the bank. The rest of it can be out on loans. You then put your money in the bank, the reserve increases, and so the debt keeps on increasing. The cost of that is that in order to pay the debt, we need to be creating more stuff to sell. You know, and so in order to maintain this fiat system, you need to continually create more shit that people will buy. You know, and so you have this religion of consumerism that is needed to be there. We need to keep on growing the GDP. We need to keep on growing our economy, grow at the expense of the planet. and I think, you know, that is the massive cost that is facing us right now. I mean, every single problem that we think of around climate change, etc., comes down to consumption and the need to continuously consume and grow this economy that the humans are doing because of the way money is created at the moment. You know, so if you look at, like, you know, the amount of electricity, it's about, say, I read the statistics about it'll run, you know, so yes, the amount of Bitcoin money that electricity that is used to create to maintain the security of Bitcoin is about, it could run the whole of Ireland. But at the same time, it would be like about 19 hours on the US power grid. You know, so those are the comparisons. The other thing is that the electricity is used to mine new Bitcoin. It's not used to create transactions. And so what a lot of people do is say, well, you know, there's so many transactions in a block. This is how much electricity was used. Therefore, each transaction costs so much electricity. Imagine if you increase the transactions, how much electricity that's going to, you know, so the logic is incorrect. You know,
if you return back to the MySpace comparison, and compare it to, again, this idea of smaller, faster, more intelligent mammals seeing the demise of dinosaurs, the speed of decision-making presumably is going to be a factor in the fitness landscape among the various technological implementations of...
So I mean, it's easy to fix that. You just get a leader and you get a company to run it.
Okay, so I'm also thinking now about...
I'm playing devil's advocate. Yeah. That's the other alternative.
With regards to this decision making.
For instance, like one thing that I think blockchain is really going to do to improve society is going to free us from the need to own products, to own electronic products, particularly electronic products like vehicles and cell phones and drones and all these things. Everyone doesn't need to own their own units.
Yes.
We could rent units through the form of digital currencies. So, for instance, if you have a family and dad goes to work, he can commute in a simple vehicle to work. But then the family wants to go away on a holiday, they can commute in a van. Instead of owning a van and owning a car, all the equipment and the electronics can be shared by the community. Which I don't think a system like Bitcoin would be able to...
It can do. Yes, it can. Yeah, no, I mean, with Lightning Network, we can do that. I mean, this is the thing, you know, so there's a lot of media attention given to the scaling debate. It was only 2 years. You know, now, I mean, I was on a panel with one of the CIOs of the big banks, and they're like, yeah, no, this decentralized consensus doesn't work. You know, we know that hierarchical systems work. I'm like, well, how long does it take you guys to make a decision in the bank? How quickly can you move your ship? What has been happening in the meantime while the scaling debate has been going on is we've been working on Schnorr signatures, we've been working on Lightning Network, ways of making this thing efficient. I mean, the amount of commits to the Bitcoin blockchain is higher than any of the other blockchains. You know, the amount of incredible innovation that's going into it is there. You know, the platform is innovating, and when Lightning Network rolls out, you know, it's going to do all of that. It'll allow me to send you 0.1 cent. And then the next second send you another 0.1 cent.
How exactly does the Lightning Network work? I know, but I think other people should know.
I can give you a really sort of metaphorical explanation if you've got time.
Please.
Is that okay? All right. So if I go into business with you, and we put together a contract, you know, like this is how we agree, and then you and I decide, okay, I want to buy a boardroom table, and you're like, dude, we haven't got any customers yet. A boardroom table is a total waste of time. So what do? We go to court and we ask the judge, what does our contract say we can do? And what does the judge do? Say, don't be stupid, get out of my courtroom, you're wasting my time. You know, we don't operate businesses like that. And yet if I want to buy a cup of coffee at the moment, enough electricity that can run the whole of Ireland, 100 times the CPU power of Google, 11,000 different computers around the world, all make sure that I only buy one cup of coffee. That's Bitcoin at the moment, and it's needed to be that because you need the system that is secure and stable and so on, which is why we can operate business, because we know if it messes up, we've got the legal system to go to and they will sort it out somehow. Metaphor, right? Okay, so another illustration now is, say we go to a bar together. I don't want to use my credit card every single time I buy a beer. So what I do, I take out my wallet, I give the barman my driver's license, and we set up a tab. I'm not going to leave the bar because the barman's got my driver's license. He's not going to run off with my driver's license, well, because it's not worth anything to him. And every time I get a beer, he marks down on a piece of paper. And at the end of the night, what we do, he gives me my ID book. He then tallies up all of the balance, and we put it through as one transaction on the banking system. So Bitcoin smart contracts, every single transaction is actually a smart contract. With Bitcoin smart contracts, we can create smart contracts that create what we call payment channels between two people that operate very similar to a tab. It means that we create sort of a bond transaction that ensures that none of us cheat. And then after that, we can start trading with each other off-chain. At any point, any one of us can put the final transaction on the blockchain, which is what enables us to then do this one-to-one. If any of us cheat, the other guy gets all the money. That's how the smart contract is set up.
So you take one transaction fee and you divide it by all the transactions that happen.
Correct. So we can transact for a very, very, very long time and never going, but it doesn't really help because it's just between you and me. So now what Lightning Network does is, say, for instance, I've got a channel open with you, you've got a channel open with him, he's got a channel open with him, I can pay him through this channel using multi-hop routing and smart contracts and all sorts of things in a decentralized, secure way. So we can keep these things going like off-chain for a long time, but anytime anybody can actually commit to the blockchain. So it kind of, so if you think of Bitcoin as being like Ethernet, which basically means that every single broadcast message goes to every single machine, which is exactly how Bitcoin works. Lightning Network is kind of like TCP/IP, which, for instance, if you go to Google, you're not going to Google, you're routing through a bunch of different computers until eventually that information is compiled on Google and comes back to you. Now, my nephew that surfs YouTube, he doesn't need to know about TCP/IP, but that's how the internet works. And so what we have with Lightning Network is like another protocol layer that enables us to transact super quick with very low transaction fees, but you've got the solid base of the Bitcoin blockchain that cannot change, that is super secure, probably the most secure database in the world, etc., with high transaction fees and slow confirmation times, but it doesn't matter because it's like this solid sort of, kind of like gold. We would put gold into the bank and then we'd trade paper because we knew that we could draw the gold from, obviously it doesn't work like that anymore. So Lightning Network is almost like the cash to the gold in the bank.
What happens in a situation where someone is hacking, or not hacking, but someone is exploiting the Lightning Network?
You can't exploit the Lightning Network.
Is it a blockchain itself?
No, it's based on cryptography. So it's using the same sort of smart contracts and crypto puzzles and so on that need to be solved that you have on Bitcoin that secures Bitcoin. Lightning Network's doing the same thing, using various hashes and onion routing and blah, blah, blah. I don't have time to go into it, and quite frankly, it's a little bit beyond me. but some of literally the smartest minds in the world in cryptography are working on it. You and the new, yeah, sorry.
So I would like to bring the conversation again a little bit up to, and my question is, so with blockchain and these digital currencies, we are basically disrupting.
Maybe can I add a quick question to the
Yeah,
Lightning
sure.
Network before
Sure.
we...
You want to go down?
No, I just want to
Yeah.
clear one last thing.
Yeah.
To open these channels, you have to keep the same address, right? So doesn't it compromise privacy?
So it's actually more private than Bitcoin at the moment, in that it's set up in such a way that the person you're sending to only knows that which it's coming from and where it's going. But you don't know where it's ending up, and you don't know if that's the originator. So you end up actually having a better layer of security than you had before. And there's nothing stopping you from setting up multiple channels and so on and so forth. So what Lightning Network actually does is creates a much more anonymous. It's using sort of onion-based security and so on and so forth that is used in Tor. So VPNs, Tor, etc. It's that kind of security that is going to sort of make it even more private than Bitcoin is at the moment. Which I don't tell the banks much, because right now Bitcoin's nice because it's an open ledger and you can follow where the money goes. But I think this is going to be really interesting.
Wow.
So yeah, cool.
So basically, with blockchain and with Bitcoin, there is the potential to disrupt very powerful institutions, right? Money and government. So resistance is to be expected. Right? So where do you think? How will this manifest, and do you see any potential for this technology to basically be shut down?
So for sure. Sorry, you can answer.
Certainly I can see powers, invested powers already reacting to this. So it's inevitable there's going to be a force against it. But when it's all ultimately cryptography secure, and the option is to go underground, how do you legislate against that?
Yeah, I mean, 95% of all music is pirated. We need to shut these guys down. Sorry,
say that again?
95% of all music is pirated. We need to shut these guys down.
Thing.
How did that work for the music industry?
They will try. They will try. But
So I mean, there are a couple of dynamics. There are a couple of countries that have made it illegal. In fact, Russia made it illegal at one stage and then realized that it's no point, and it started actually embracing it. South Africa is actually really open. I mean, the South African Reserve Bank has got an amazing outlook on it. They see it as a mechanism for financial inclusion, which it does. It is, because it bypasses all of the KYC and all that kind of stuff that you have to do to get a bank account. So now suddenly people that don't necessarily have that or don't qualify can now suddenly have a digital, currency. They also, their belief is that regulation follows innovation, and we don't know what this is yet, so let's figure it out first. But for sure, the other thing that I've realized in speaking with, I've been speaking with central banks and so on, there was a shift that happened in my mind where I suddenly realized that the banks are these powerful institutions that we're all but they're also filled with human beings. And what was interesting is I'd go to the financial conferences and I'll speak in the space and everyone would be like, money, blah, 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 institution. And you get out and everyone's an anarchist. Or in the banks, you're speaking to these people and they're like, this is really fascinating. We see, and so when you stop speaking to the institution, you start speaking to the humans. There's an acceptance and a realization. Okay, of course, you get some of the sort of stalwarts that just don't get the tech. And, like some of the economists, a guy by the name of... I can't remember him.
Warren Buffett came out pretty clearly last week.
Yeah, but he's too old to understand the stuff, man.
Indeed. I'm not suggesting otherwise. But he's a fairly trusted investor with a decent track record. But
he called it a FOMO.
What did he say?
Oh, he basically said it's inevitable. Inevitable that it's going to crash. He wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot bar.
So, a lot of the arguments I get from that kind of person is like, well, what gives it its value? It's got no intrinsic value. Yeah. But, what gives money its value? It's got no intrinsic... even if it was still tied to gold, what gives gold its... even gold doesn't have intrinsic value. Well, scarcity, shiny, pretty, but it's us that give it its value. And with Bitcoin, you're right. Scarcity is what gives these things. And with gold, now Bitcoin's the same. Scarcity is the technology that we've created, digital scarcity. One Bitcoin is just a number. It's, as in 1 rand, $1 is just a number, but it's the scarcity that we can now move time around to each other that makes it technologically significant, or it's a great utility. Yes.
Inflationary currencies versus deflationary.
Is that a question or a statement?
I'm asking, like obviously Bitcoin is capped.
So
there are now currencies that are coming up where they say they have 5% inflation.
Yeah. So do you?
So
Bitcoin is a deflationary currency in terms of there's a limited amount. Every 10 minutes, 12.5 Bitcoin get created. It started off at 50. Every 4 years, that halves. So by the year 2140, we will sort of almost reach 21 million Bitcoin, and there'll be no more. But if you've got an increasing supply, static or limited demand, you're going to have deflation. Your value is going to go up. Now, that doesn't necessarily make for a good currency because, I bought a set of speakers with Bitcoin a while ago, and like 2 weeks later, I could have bought like twice the amount of speakers that I bought. And so you generally hold it rather than spend it because the value goes up. But at the same time, over the next 5 years, the volatility and so on will go down, and it'll become sort of more like fiat currency in terms of these massive jumps that we're seeing. Now the theory is that you need to build in a bit of inflation into a currency. In other words, print more money and make the money worth less so that the money flows. The problem is who gets to say how much money is created, and that's the job of the central bank. The central bank does that by managing interest rates and so on to try and keep the supply. Now, the very first block in the Bitcoin blockchain is that the chancellor has agreed to the next bailout for banks. What did that mean? It means that they were creating new money to bail out the guys that actually caused the major financial crash in 2008 in the first place. Where does that money come from? Well, the money is just created. What does that do to the value of money? Well, there's more money, so the money becomes valued less. Who pays for that? We do. It's a tax that you can't see, but our money then becomes less and the buying power of your money becomes less. And so this problem of hyperinflation is something that we've seen in many, many different places. I mean, Zimbabwe is a classic example, but even Germany went through it and so on and so forth. So whether or not inflation or deflation is a good thing, theoretically, people say it is a good thing to have an inflationary currency, but the problem always comes down to who controls that. And with cryptocurrency, you can regulate that into the currency itself. Does that answer the question? Sorry, yes.
Hi. So this might not be as fun to talk about, but I mean, as someone who has been sort of getting like investments through cryptocurrencies and also paying some staff and some staff, like for example, in India,
yes,
says it's not legal. Sorry, we can't take payment in Bitcoin or in Ethereum or such because they're scared.
Yes.
And actually, so am I, because in South Africa, yet they might be open to it. I mean, because it has so many amazing functions. However, when it gets taxed as a appreciating asset, you start paying for things plus 40%, and then there's a lot of challenges. I mean, like you guys have mentioned the struggles with scalability. These things are important, and that excites me as well. It's a good conversation. But in order to use it as a national currency, like you've got sort of big problems. It's like saying we need to look at the amount of water we are consuming, but actually atomic bombs might be the reason why we all die. But everyone's ignoring that thing. And I think that we need to also focus on how is government, I'm happy to disrupt banks, but we also need to look at as a taxpayer and being a contributor to society. I'd want to pay tax, but if for every rand I'm spending on my staff, if I have to add 40% to that, that's going to be ludicrous.
So something I think Tim said about tax that's worthwhile having a quick discussion about is, when you trust the system, when you trust those who represent you to make the right decision, to invest in the infrastructure that you know will contribute to the growth, cohesion and happiness, if you like, of your community, you'd presumably be really happy to pay tax. You should be delighted. Tim gives some really nice examples of that. And we talked today about local currencies, which is a particular interest. I wonder, it's kind of a question really, when you have the opportunity for local currencies and uniquely local taxation, you must surely remove a great deal of administration, all sorts of issues around decision making and the conflict resulting from, for example, in the UK, most of the power is centralised in London. There have been moves over the last 10 years to give power to local authorities, the Welsh government, the Scottish government, and so forth. But it does seem that the blockchain could provide a mechanism for local exchanges to be taxed for local infrastructure, informed by local knowledge. And it just seems very efficient and may well result in people being willing to pay taxation, willing to pay tax, not being concerned about, well, maybe 40% is a bit much, but being happy to contribute to the local economy.
I mean, just to add to this, the majority of the economy actually in the developing countries are anyways part of the informal sector, so they're not really paying any taxes. And all of these people are also not part of the bankable society, so to say. So it would be very interesting to see a parallel system actually running with the formal economy, and then distribute blockchain or cryptocurrencies to those who actually have a mobile phone and they would like to transact.
So I mean, in South Africa, we have a 40 billion rand informal industry that cannot be taxed because there's just no way of recording it. It relies on people's honesty and so on. I mean, it's a complex question you're asking. I mean, the first thing around fear, that was your first question around fear of the new technologies. I mean, you have that with every single technology. I mean, we have it with the internet. I remember when we started Mixit, I mean, I spent like so much of my time going and speaking at schools, telling them, no, you know, we're not a platform to distribute porn. I mean, we're just an instant messenger like Skype. But, you know, with every new technology comes a whole lot of sort of mythology and fears around it. I know that every single time I use a bank now, after using crypto, I get so frustrated. I mean, to give you an example, I sold some Bitcoin for somebody that had invested a while back. It took me from scanning their paper wallet that I'd created them to actually exchanging the Bitcoin in exchange 11 minutes, literally. And that's because I had to wait for confirmation time, you know, because of the 10 minutes. I then withdrew it into my bank account. That took a day. I then tried to send the money to them. I couldn't. I had to phone my bank manager because it was higher than my limit, and then it had raised a flag as to why am I moving so much money out of my account. I mean, it's my money, you know, and I mean, eventually like 2.5 days later in the banking system, the guy's got the money compared to the 11 minutes here. You know, so it is a much more efficient system, even though it is inefficient at the moment. You know, I think as we see the technology grow, you know, I mean, if I compare to like when TV started and, you know, you wait for that signal to go away and then, you know, compared to, but I don't use TV anymore. I stream from Netflix and so on because internet is there. Then around tax, I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, I agree with you around, you know, infrastructure needs to be paid for. But I think there are new models that we can start imagining now with this technology. I mean, why do we need to hire a set of people to manage the commons when we can actually code it into a blockchain, into a smart contract and so on? You know, where I could actually decide where my money goes and crowdfund, and everybody becomes an owner of the commons, and we can vote on where the money goes. And so, I mean, look, I'm thinking like 20 years down the line. I think this technology is going to just shift the way we think about all sorts of ways of funding infrastructure. And then if you think of tax itself, I mean, where does income tax come from? You know, it comes from originally the central authority issuing a currency to you, and you are paying tax for using that currency that they've issued to you. You know, so that it could go to the war chest, usually. So who issues the Bitcoin? Well, the miners do. Are we paying tax to them? Well, yeah, transaction fees. You know, where does Bitcoin sit? Well, everywhere. You know, every single Bitcoin transaction between me and you, even sitting in this room, is an international global transaction because every transaction goes everywhere. So there are a whole lot of new dynamics that I think we're going to need to work through. I mean, I'm certainly not a tax lawyer, and I mean, generally I try and be really conservative around that. I, you know, follow all the rules for now, but I think part of what this technology can do is start questioning those rules in the first place. You know, and when I say to people like, why should we pay tax? Everyone thinks, you know, I'm like this anarchist, which I am, but that's not the point. I think that it is our human right to question some of these ancient institutions that we've inherited. And to challenge them and make them more humane and make them more transparent and, you know, flow better and allow less wastage and so on and so forth. Sorry, yeah.
So there, I think people are jumping on the bandwagon. I think it's a bubble. I think there's real value in this, don't get me wrong, but it's a bubble. I'm not investing in it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, we watched that video the other day about, you know, if you say blockchain 3 times, then, you know, investors will wet their pants. You know, I mean, let's go into Silicon Valley, you close the windows, you close the door, you shout blockchain, 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 and out will jump, you know, investors and throw money at you. You know, so there's a lot of hype around that. I see that as actually one of the risks in the space, you know, in that it's not about that, you know, but at the moment, it is about that. You know, there are a lot of opportunists, a lot of people that see it as a get-rich-quick scheme, a lot of people creating Ponzi schemes, a lot of people creating all sorts of shitcoins that really have no substance, but, you know, you're hoping that if you buy it, well, then you'll get in early because you didn't get in early in Ethereum and Bitcoin. You know, I think it's a phase we're going through. It's like, you know, when you get like pimples as a teenager and stuff like that. You know, you almost got to go through it, and there's going to come a .com crash, just like we had with the internet and so on. So where do you get your compass in this absolute craziness? And for me, it's a really good understanding of the tech and what it's designed to do, which is this incredibly secure ledger that doesn't require a third party to protect it. You know, and I think long term, that's the thing that's going to win out. You know, I think you know, what we're seeing maybe with Bitcoin is an adoption curve as the smart money is now starting to see it, take it more seriously. It's not just the geeks anymore. But at the same time, you know, these are noobs, and so they're not used to the volatility, and so they get out really quickly as well. And so we're going to see a bit of volatility for a while. But I think what we're seeing with Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on is adoption. You know, but you know, everybody and their auntie is now making a coin. And, you know, with no fundamentals at all, it's really just some guy creating a white paper that someone helped him to put together. And the thing is, there's no commitment as well. You know, you put out a white paper, people hoping that, you know, they're not really interested in what you've done. They're just interested in hopefully this coin's going to go really big and then I can make some money. You know, so at the moment that space is all like the wrong reasons, but I think the underlying things around ICOs and so on are actually good ideas. It's just that we've got to get through this sort of very infantile approach to it.
Yeah, and I wonder, regarding brand awareness, I mean, I know there's someone else in the room who's far more an expert than I am on brand, but it seems to be misaligned with their core brand values. I mean, just to launch an ICO, just for a bit of buzz, that could really backfire quite badly, I imagine.
Yes, and the thing is, you know, so I mean, I think one of the big problems that we have generally is that you know, we measure what companies need to do. I mean, you know, so Milton Friedman, the economist, one of the things that sort of became a belief system in companies is that the maximum social good of a company is to maximize profit for shareholders. You know, and more that the shareholders become a little bit further away from what the company is actually doing. And so we do all these sorts of things to grow the value of the company and so on. You know, really what companies should be about is how do you create value for your customers, you know, and for sure the profits and stuff will come. But that's not how it runs right now. And so people, when you're maximizing profits, you're thinking incredibly short term. And if I can get a spike in my blah, you know, I mean, Twitter was like criticized because it only made 2 billion in a year because it hadn't grown. And part of it is this whole addiction to growth at all costs, you know, which is the previous conversation we had around consumerism and all that. You know, so there is this belief system that drives that we need to drive the share price up. And if we can make money and if there's free money available, then take it. You know, it's like the greatest social good, blah, blah, blah. You know, but long term, it's not. You know, because this isn't about the money. This is about, you know, something much bigger than that.
Someone made an observation about how firms, institutions, grow an administration to manage complexity as they grow. And ultimately those administrations become self-serving. And in the face of changes in the environment, they resist change. Yeah. The nature of the firm seems to be changing potentially massively. There's a quote by a guy called Esko Gilpy who said, the nature of the firm's going to be completely transformed. We can foresee 1 million people coming together for 15 minutes to perform a task. That's the new potential dynamic of a firm. Yeah. I mean, I wonder how that fits in with society, with a sense of stability, with a sense of safety. Are we entering a point here where actually in the sense of digital divide, haves and have-nots, is Warren Buffett about to be properly left behind, holding old money? And while there's a new emerging class of crypto kiddies who are taking over the world, what does that mean for society, for us? I mean, do we trust these crazy kids?
So yeah, I think that cryptocurrency, you know, I mean, and I'm not talking about all the crazy. I'm talking about the sort of the fundamental technology is the real sort of Occupy Wall Street. I mean, it's been coming for a long time. I mean, even the fact that we have corporations. I mean, where did corporations start? Well, they started with, the merchants starting to make more money than the elite. And the elite figured, well, we better sort of control this. And so we created chartered corporations. And you're only allowed to operate in a certain vertical if the elite or the, sort of allowed you to do so. And so corporations were born. And that's been the model that we've had for a very, very long time. Digital allows us to do things quickly and to stop. I think it's wonderful that, why do I need to keep this firm going when we've actually just achieved what we set out to do? Now, the value of getting people to cooperate and work together and the padding that comes in terms of, I don't have to worry about like next month because I'm getting a salary. All of those things that corporations give us are something that we need to maybe reinvent. And I mean, those are the good things. But this whole thing of a corporation sticking around for the sake of the corporation to feed its shareholders, that's got to go. Because it's not serving the greater humanity. And I think cryptocurrencies can challenge that. Yeah, sorry.
I'm a novice to this. I've been watching it from the outside. But there's something I struggle to understand with all these cryptocurrencies, is that everything is based around a dollar value and a trade value. Today you buy $500 worth of cryptocurrency and tomorrow it's worth $1,000.
Yes.
And that's very much an undecentralized system. So you have everyone getting into this whole crypto frenzy now, and all these platforms advertising, invest now because you're going to make money. And to me, that takes away the entire concept of what you guys are trying to do. And it also begs the question, how are you going to transact with that when today I want to buy a glass of wine, hypothetically speaking, for 0.2 cryptos, and tomorrow, what is the value of that glass of wine?
Gotcha.
How do I attach a value inside of that cryptocurrency?
Yeah.
And then the third thing about it is also, is it not all more about what you were speaking about earlier on, is about the unbanked people, is that, it enables people who haven't been able to transact in the world that we all a bit elitist in that sense, have been able to transact, and that sort of is completely being missed in all of this.
Yeah.
Because all I'm seeing is a whole bunch of people, and people that I know, all their intention with cryptocurrency right now is to make a shitload of money in a dollar sense. Not in a cryptocurrency, but invest and get their money out.
No, I agree with you fully.
Sorry, but and that's where I'm...
No, I hear you. I mean, I agree with you.
The technology of decentralization, as powerful it is that human nature is just completely destroying...
So for now, until we, 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin, 1 ETH equals 1 ETH, 1 Rand equals 1 Rand. I think the problem that we have as humans is we think that money is the thing that we need. Sorry, yes.
So how do I transact with Bitcoin? I was sitting with the company this morning and chatting to them. They've raised their investment rounds through Bitcoin
Yes.
with the hope that their Bitcoin will be worth more.
Yes.
So it just doesn't make sense.
No, I mean, that's the incentive. Now, the thing is, what that's doing is driving growth. As we drive growth, we drive volume. And so then with volume, you get stability. And within 5 years, you'll have the volatility won't be so much and it'll be more useful. Technology takes a time to grow. It's like when we brought out cars for the first time, no one was using them because, we thought that only the elites would be using cars because there's no petrol, there's no roads. Yeah.
And this is in layman's terms.
No, sure.
What you're saying to me is now, 5 years ago, I bought for 500 Rands worth of cryptocurrency.
Yes.
Let's say, hypothetically speaking, it's worth $1 million now. I've made my money through the 10-year cycle.
Yes.
So what you have at the end of the day is an elitist group of people that own a whole lot of Bitcoin, that are wealthy, and you have a whole bunch of bottom feeders that are trying to get into the system, but they can't afford to get them out.
They're spending more money to get in.
Yeah, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, but I mean, yes.
If we look at the system today, if we look at a country like South Africa, you drive into Tamboskurt, etc., property prices are completely through the roof. Elitism is sitting here, and we have a poverty, and there's a complete, and that's what I'm struggling to understand.
No, I totally get you. So I think when we get to the point where it's used, I won't be thinking in terms of how can I buy Bitcoin. It'll be like, what can I trade for Bitcoin? That is when I think it reaches its success. Right now, no, we're not there because people buy Bitcoin and they sell Bitcoin. They're seeing Bitcoin as this thing that will make them more money. Whereas when it gets to the point, and I'm using Bitcoin as an example, when I think of a Coke in terms of 0.01 or 1 Satoshi or 5, you know, and not that I drink Coke, but you know, when we are trading for it and I'm trading with you, then the thing becomes what it was meant to be, I think. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we at the moment see money as value. You know, we see money as that thing that we need. When it's not, it's a technology. It's a mechanism for us to trade with each other. You know. Sure, but you need the cryptocurrency in order to incentivize the security. Without Bitcoin, there's no need for miners to spend all their money and the electricity to actually mine the Bitcoin. So it starts with cryptocurrency. You know, that's what secures it. Once we've done that, for sure, there are all sorts of applications you can put on top of it.
I hear
you know.
But in my layman's naivety, I'm almost seeing another pattern of humanity being recreated through just various senses of technology being created.
For sure.
As humans, instinctively, we are for ourselves. As much as we want to be in a group, we're always looking after ourselves and trying to get the most out of the system. That's just an instinctive.
So I've experienced something quite different.
Yeah, me too. That isn't always the case. I mean, that's
yes. I mean, that was my opinion. But what I've experienced in cryptocurrency is extreme generosity, even in my own personal life, that I've never experienced anywhere before, ever.
But generosity how?
In terms of my father passing away and somebody sending me a whole lot of money to travel to the funeral, using cryptocurrency. Yes, he sent it to me in cryptocurrency.
No, but what I'm saying to you, that's a philosophy.
So.
Cryptocurrency, I'm sorry that I'm being...
No. But I've never encountered that kind of generosity in any other organization, including the religious organizations that I was part of. It's within this community that and that's one of my examples. And I've had a couple where people have given me stuff that I needed. But there's a thing called Pineapple Fund now, where there's a whole lot of people that have. We don't even know who they are. It's completely anonymous, where you can apply for funding and it'll actually donate funding to all sorts of things. You know.
This is just something that I'm
No.
seeing. There's a whole bunch of people that have bought cryptocurrency earlier on are incredibly wealthy now in dollar terms.
Yes.
And not, in cryptocurrency. And that's where I just beg to question the whole thing. And I think there's an absolute value in the whole blockchain technology. And there's so much more. And that's just the way that I'm seeing it. I don't want to get into
No, I agree. And I mean, yes, we're going through this sort of adolescent phase. And I mean, look, there's a chance that it won't make it through.
If you were to compare the barons, the railway barons in the US. So, for example, I'm aware that Stanford University was set up by Leland Stanford, who did it for social good. Why? Because his son went to Harvard, was rejected because he wasn't from the right sort of people, apparently. But actually, he'd made his money through pretty much creating monopolies and ripping people off. They were fine. He was exploiting, as others were, a new territory, and they weren't particularly altruistic. But it seems to me that the philosophy that Bitcoin was born out of, this open source community, it has something in it that engenders this generosity, this contribution. I mean, I've taught students who would boast, yeah, I've done a commit every day for the last 100 days on GitHub. What's he getting paid for that? Nothing, actually. I mean, he's just developing his skills, engaging with the community. It isn't this zero-sum game that was implicit to your observation that we're all in it for ourselves. When you recognise that there are win-win scenarios, when through contributing and collaborating we all benefit, then we all win. And it seems to me that there is a culture among open source contributors and workers that is of the right sort. The generosity, and I am seeing it too. People who were involved early, they're giving.
I mean, look, Bitcoin isn't this magical thing that's going to change humanity. As humans, we need to change drastically. And cryptocurrency is going to bring out. Just like a lot of technology. A lot of technology has been invented by the military and by the porn industry and by all sorts of things that we see as bad and outcome something interesting. And with cryptocurrency, yes, you're going to get all sorts of greed that comes as well. You know, that is part of and parcel of being human and being in the world we live in. That is created by the previous system and who knows what else. But what I have with cryptocurrency and with blockchain and so on is a new set of tools. One of the things that we need to be doing is reinventing economics, reinventing how we operate as human beings. We have to. It's crucial. It's almost desperate. And the one place that we haven't been able to do it is in the custodians of the economics has been the institutions. They move too slowly. You know, it's not open source. Whereas what we have now with cryptocurrency is a whole new set of building blocks, Lego blocks, and open source technologies that we can start experimenting with new possibilities without needing to go through the institutions.
Yeah, the institutions move slowly, and that's a feature. Now, seriously, now, if you think of what's happening in the US, it's been suggested, that Trump could have caused all sorts of problems, but the institutions that exist, which move slowly, do seem to be gradually wearing him down. And there are concerns, aren't there, that, that someone takes this technology and uses it. Well, a colleague said, we have to be cautious. If we undermine our institutions, we risk being enslaved. They're not great, but they're the best thing we've got. We've got to work carefully within them and transform them in order to make sure that there is a kind of a continuum without a collapse.
So yes and no. I think what we need is a dialectic of institutional and anarchy.
Sorry, what do you mean?
Institutions on their own will go really slowly and will end up, becoming really static. And then you have the anarchists that actually then drive. I mean, I'm using these terms. I think we need a dynamic of both. So we need someone like me that is putting pressure on and saying get rid of the institutions. And you need the institutions that are going to keep someone like me in check until we figure something out that is beyond both. And what blockchain has done is it's given us a whole new set of tools that go beyond us just picketing and standing up and occupying Wall Street. We can actually build things that actually challenge these systems that cause them to wake up and go, hang on, wait a minute.
There's something about the transparency we were talking about earlier, having access to the tools, it being open.
Correct.
Some colleagues, again, in the open source community, if we don't have access to the code, then again, we do really risk.
Yes. I mean, I was talking to a financial institution recently. I was talking about open source. They're like, geez, we don't even share code amongst departments in our institution. How do you innovate? So there was a question here, and I think we maybe need to just end off. Wrap it up. Okay, so we can take one more question.
You can say as long as you like, but because Mandy says we have plenty of battery, but
I need to get going.
9 o'clock.
Yeah.
Don't want to keep you coming back.
Cool. So one more question.
2 more.
Yeah, okay, 2 more.
I just wanted to add to this topic. I think I kind of lost along the way. And from my perspective, I've witnessed what you guys are talking about, especially with GitHub. I spent a lot of time studying blockchain technology, and what I've noticed is that blockchain has become quite community building.
Yes.
Yeah. It's not actually about the money. It's about the evolution of the technology. And there are these communities, for instance, like, I don't agree with a lot of the things, quite a lot of the philosophy of Bitcoin, because I do believe there's a whole lot of techies that didn't know what they were doing. They stumbled onto these Bitcoins and they got massively rich in the process. But they're still the early movers. It's the same problem we have with the current financial system, where there are very few people that have a concentrated wealth. And Bitcoin's kind of creating the same thing, where the miners they have access to the creation of the currency. They're able to manipulate the markets. They're able to put up sell walls and buy walls, and completely manipulates the situation where people that live in ghettos don't have access to this value add, and people that are in the know are able to accumulate over time. People aren't transacting with Bitcoin. They're accumulating it with the idea that it's going to make them mega wealthy in the future. So it's not really a currency. It's a store of value for people to become really rich, and it doesn't really have for me, I don't see a place for it in society. But then I do see all of these other projects which are just bubbling up from the woodworks that are creating communities and allowing people to kind of collaborate on really world-changing ideas, like, for instance, property and IDs, and so it's not really about the money. It's actually about the technology, like you were describing.
If I can just add to that, sorry that
Yeah.
I'm going to say that.
No worries.
If I were to look at it, you speak about
can we not distribute that to people to create a new economy where they can start transacting it? You know, because if we, sorry, I'm going to say it, but if you want to solve one of the biggest problems in the world, it's poverty. It's the way that the systems have been running for years, and that's an opportunity.
I can say with a certain level of confidence there are cases of this happening right now.
I'd love to see those, and not every platform that is wanting to, you to invest your money into it so we can become more. That to me is just...
So I mean, there's a whole group of us today that we're literally discussing and brainstorming exactly that. You know, so the intention is there. Poverty is really complex. It isn't just a case of giving people money. You know, there's universal basic income projects that have been built on the blockchain. There's all sorts of experiments. And I think that's what we need to be doing now, is experimenting and trying to figure this out. We don't know what the answers are. Anybody that comes up with an answer right now to poverty is wrong. You know, we need as many experiments as possible. And what this technology does is it gives us a set of tools that we can experiment with. The other thing to remember, I mean, I remember when I saw a car phone once, and I thought, geez, I will never, ever be able to afford one of those. And yet now cell phones are like everywhere. You know, technology starts slowly, and it starts with the elite. You know, and then once we've figured it out, it spreads. You know, I mean, everybody, like in Africa, has a cell phone, even if it's a feature phone. You know, I mean, beforehand, you know, when I got my first cell phone, I didn't tell anybody because I didn't want them to think I'm like really rich. You know, that's how technology goes, and I think the same thing is going to happen with this new technology that we've created. You know, it's in its very, very early stages. You know, really, it's like the car before roads were invented and petrol was available, and you know, so you know, I think we need to give it time. And for sure, there are many issues, you know, as there would be. You know, it's just how things are. You know, nothing is straight and easy. You know, life is incredibly messy and complex with many dynamics.
I think the concentration of wealth in Bitcoin is going to be one of its major setbacks. Because in the future, for instance, if a Bitcoin goes up to $1 million, you know, the concentration of wealth in a few of the rich list are going to make them the new mega wealthy, the new 1%.
Possibly, my hope is that the new wealthy are guys like the guys that I've spent the day with, you know, who really aren't in it for the money. Are in it like, how do we change the world? Who realize that, you know, I think the other thing that Bitcoin is doing, you know, is it's shifting our belief in this money religion that we have. I mean, the amount of people that are questioning, like, what gives Bitcoin its value? I say, well, what gives money its value? Oh, I never thought of that before. You know, it's waking us up to you know, this dormant system that we're just born into, and we've continued for our whole lives believing in the God of money. It's our most fundamental religion on earth, you know, because that's how the world works. And for the first time in a long time, we have an alternative that is causing us to question these systems. And for sure, people are going to try and use the old patterns in the new system, you know, but there are a lot of us that aren't. You know, there are a lot of people that are starting to see through the belief of money. You know, that for me gives me my biggest hope. I mean, that's what I'm in it for. I mean, really, that's what I'm in it for. Yeah.
There's an RSA talk, an animated talk, that showed some experiments in relation to extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. And they showed pretty conclusively, both in the US and in a relatively poor area in India, that beyond a certain amount, money doesn't actually motivate particularly well. It seems that, you know, like the open source software guys, as long as there is a sense that behind the scenes, people aren't being ripped off and there's a fairness of contribution and reward, people can get on with what is meaningful to them. That's what I think is so encouraging about the open source software movement, and I hope it's what blockchain will enable. A sense of get the money out of the way, do good shit, valuable stuff, together to form community, solve problems. Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And the money, and we just have the trust that actually the resources will come to you through these new structures. Cool. Fingers crossed.